So, sports in the 1600s to 1700. I couldn't do basketball because of obvious reasons that basketball was not created back then. But, so in the 1600s, I would say cricket was very huge. It was just being introduced as a professional sport, and it was getting professional teams, and the sport became known worldwide. But for the time being, in like the start of the 1600s, it was mainly underground and gambling, obviously. But there were also sports like billiards. Billiards isn't really a sport, but we'll count it here. Billiards and derby. Derby's horse racing, obviously. Well, not obviously. Some people might not know that, but it's horse racing. And yeah, but it was huge for gambling. People gambled. It was huge. Like, gambling was insane. The person would pick a horse. Depending on the likelihood of a horse winning, they would get the amount of times they bet on the horse. Like 2 to 3, or they could get like 25 times. It's insane, but they could get a lot of money. So moving on to the 1700s, there were there isn't that many sports because like sports just weren't important. But did you know that people actually held underground jousting matches, which is insane? Like, they underground, obviously, so it wasn't like, I wouldn't say legal, but like it wasn't like, and they held it underground. But that's insane that jousting matches even were a thing still then. Yeah, and people bet on it. There was also football was coming on the rise. I mean soccer, but football was coming on the rise, and it wasn't like anything like it is now. It was a lot more dangerous. Like, people actually were a lot more physical, and people broke their necks while playing the sport. It was crazy. It was crazy. But also, ice hockey was becoming a known sport. There were no teams, obviously, but it was becoming a well-known sport. And there was even starting to be some. They played on frozen lakes, which is cool. Okay, for starters, it's pretty cool. But other than that, there's not really that many sports. Thank you. Right, so my project is about sports, and I'm going to be talking to you about sports in the 1800s. So, in the early 1800s, Americans started playing sports. Well, of course they started playing sports, but they basically started playing baseball, and baseball in informal teams, too. Now, this is what started the growth of baseball. They played with local rules, and the sport was a lot rougher than today. You could pop into one. You know what I'm saying? Whoa! In 1846, they recorded the first game of baseball, and the people described the sport as America's national pastime. Woo! People also developed sports called Puna. A sport called Puna, which basically is badminton. You know the thing where you go. No, that's basketball. You got a racket. It's like a ball. It's got feathers on it. It's really cool. Yeah, it's pretty fun. I was a goat at it, let me tell you. MVP, and it's a close relative to tennis too. Now, in the late 1800s, again, baseball kept growing and became the biggest national sport of the time. In 1856, the National Association of Baseball Players was formed, and the first baseball league was formed. Yeah! The reason there weren't that many sports back then was because most people thought that doing something other than working was like not good, and that's where the expression sloth and sin came from. So there were not that many kinds of sports being played. But once the 1900s hit, that's when many sports came to rise, like basketball, woo! Yeah! All the sports. Right! Welcome back to sports! Woo! So, early 1860s, still baseball. Baseball was going crazy! It was just pure baseball and only baseball. Well, there was also horse racing and boxing. You hit them with a. You know what I'm saying? There was some boxing, but that was, baseball. They had their league. They made their league. They had their league. They made their league back then. It was Baseball, man. But let me tell you. No, this is where we're going crazy. Let me tell you. In 1889, they made the first official rules of basketball! Woo! Oh my God, let's go! We had basketball. They made the official rules. So, I mean, there still wasn't an official league, but the official rules of basketball was finally set into place. Again, the rules are way different now. There was no 3-point line back then. Nobody making buckets. Nobody. But, it was straight layups. And, yeah. There was, it was just really a lot of baseball. Like, baseball was just ruling the state. If we're talking about other areas, it was cricket, specifically in England. But, yeah, that was basically it. Baseball was ruling the land. We are back! Now we're moving on. We're gonna do a little review. Back in the 1890s, basketball just got formed, right? And it was on its way to greatness, let me tell you. All right. Obviously, there were other sports like baseball, soccer, hockey, boxing, more, obviously. But I'm going to go into detail on basketball. Let me real quick. So, the first official basketball league was formed in 1898, and it was called the National Basketball League. Now, this was like the less perfected version of today's NBA. And, yeah. That's basically it about the National Basketball League. It did end, but I'll get that into another time. The sport was heavily segregated, and it didn't let any people of color join until the 1660s, when the NBA was just about to be formed. And yeah, that's also a really bad thing. Also, there was no 3-point line, and the first man to dunk a basketball was in like the 1920s, and yeah, and it was the most boring thing, let me tell you. But basketball was kind of boring then. People were just kind of shooting, doing layups. It was less showmanship. It was also a lot more aggressive though, so that's one thing. But yeah, basketball, what I'm saying?